Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating a couple of cards. I actually have one that I've already pre-colored and we're going to color the second one in today's video. So what I wanted to do was create a flower border using the Wildflowers stamp set. So I picked out a bunch of the stamps and you can see I already have them there in my MISTI. And in the first example that I created, you can see how I kind of have all of the flowers lined up around the card, kind of down the side and along the bottom. Now, I decided that I wanted to use our new Prayers Die-namics as well as the Sending Prayers stamp set, but I realized on this card that if I wanted to keep it vertical, I wasn't going to be able to fit the Prayers Die-namics how I wanted. So in the card we're going to create today, we're going to move the stamps around a little bit and we're going to change the pattern so that we can make everything work, and we're just going to create two different designs. And to color all of the images in today's video, we are going to mix it up a bit, and I'm going to use my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. I've had these for quite a while, and I definitely don't use them as much as I'd like to, so I decided to get them out and color in these flowers. So you can see how beautiful they look with that great shading, and it's so easy to do this with these type of markers. So I'm going to just go ahead and open my MISTI and get my paper in here, and like I mentioned before, I did move around the stamp. So when I stamp out this border, it's actually going to be a little bit different than the one I just showed you. And this is going to allow me to be able to put the prayers so that I can have it vertical, and then we're going to use the other one to create a horizontal card. So what I'm going to do is just use some Versamark ink, and I'm working on Bristol Smooth paper here. I'm using this because it works really well with the Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. They blend and go on really smoothly, so it's a really great paper to do this. So I'm just covering the stamps in Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink, because we're going to heat emboss all of these with white embossing powder. I use my magic powder bag there just to make sure I don't have any static on the paper, and I just closed my MISTI door and I'm stamping all of these flowers onto the panel. Now you can't really see it in the video since it's just clear ink, but I'm going to add some white embossing powder over top, which is going to stick to that ink. And you can kind of see as I tilt it there that it's kind of going on there. You can see the pattern we've created, and I'm just going to take it to my heat tool and I'm going to heat set this so that we can do some coloring. This is my favorite way to use these markers, to have the embossed outline. I really love the soft look of the white around the color. And then I'm going to use another marker just to kind of go around the outside just to really help them stand out. So you'll see that when we get to that at the end of the coloring. So I'm just going to set everything aside now and we're going to jump into the coloring. So I have the first panel there on screen, and my original plan was to use that as my color inspiration and pretty much color it exactly the same. But I decided for this one I wanted to go with a little bit more of a muted color palette. I didn't want to have that really bright pink color, and I wanted to have less colors on this one. So I did leave all of the coloring in for this panel, but I am going to speed it up a bit just because it takes a little bit of time to do the coloring. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm starting with my darkest color first on kind of the base of the image for these leaves. Then I'm going in with my lighter color, and then I'm going to go in with my water brush. And I'm going to use the water to kind of pull that color towards the top of the leaf to really fill it in and get that really great blend where we have the darker color at the bottom and then the lighter color towards the top. So to do all of the coloring, I'm using my Faber-Castell water brush. This is a really great water brush. I just love it because it has really controlled water, so I don't find that it puts out a lot of liquid on my project. So for the colors on here, I'm using the emerald green and the green for the leaves. This is just a really nice green combination because it has a really nice vibrant color to it. I love it for leaves or any type of greenery on a card design, especially if I'm going with a more muted color palette like I'm going to do for this one. I just find that this adds a nice pop of color to the design. So I'm going to go around and do all of the leaves first, and then I'm going to go in with my colors. Now for the flowers, I decided to use Pink Flamingo and Light Carmine, which is what I used on that first example. You can see that same peachy colored flower there right to the right. I decided to use that on two flowers on this one versus using that really bright pink color. I love this color combination. I think it looks so elegant and pretty. This would be beautiful on all sorts of different cards, and I think it works really well for the type of card I was going for today. And with the flowers, I'm doing the same process as I did with the leaves. I'm starting with my darkest color kind of in the center area of the flowers and along the edges of the flower petals. And then I'm taking the lighter color and then once again my water brush to kind of pull that color out towards the outside. And you can see with those embossed lines that it helps to contain everything and kind of keep everything inside the lines. I just find it so much easier to use these with the water when you have an embossed edge to kind of help you keep everything where it's supposed to be. And then I also wanted to mention I do keep a paper towel there beside me. You can see I'm kind of dabbing off my water brush. And that's just because as you use the water brush to blend out the different colors, you are going to pick up some of that color onto the brush. So as you move on to different colors, you're going to want to make sure you kind of just scribble that off, and that's going to remove that color just before you move on to the next one. That way you don't get any color transfer. And then once again for the yellow flowers, I did do 2 yellow flowers versus just the one. And for those, I used the lemon yellow as well as the yellow. And then for this last one here, I'm going in with like a turquoise color combination. I'm using Persian green and turquoise green. And that just gives me a really nice contrast with the darker green color in the leaves with this kind of more turquoisey color on this one. And then once I have that done, it's just going to leave the centers of the flowers. And I didn't want to have those super dark, and I didn't want to use that same really bright green color that we had used on the leaves. So I decided to go with a really pale green color and just add that onto those centers. So I'm just using pale green to do that, and once again I'm laying down the color first, and then I'm coming in with my water brush and just pulling that color out to get a little bit of shading on the centers of those flowers. And then once we have that done, we are done with all of the flower coloring, but you can see that you kind of can't see the outline of the flowers since it's white embossing on white paper. So what I like to do is go in with a very light color and kind of trace around the outside of them and then use my water brush to really kind of mute that color out. I don't want it to look like it's actually traced. I just kind of want to look like there's a little bit of shading in behind the flowers. So I usually prefer to use a blue color for this. So I'm using Haze Blue, which is a very, very light blue. You can actually see it doesn't really show up super dark, but it's just enough that it does give us a little bit of contrast in behind those embossed lines. So I really like to do that on my finished colored panel. So now we finished the coloring. I'm going to let that dry and we're going to work on the sentiment. So I have a piece of cardstock here and I'm using Abandoned Coral Distress Ink, and I'm going to add some color to one end of this. This is going to be for our second panel, the one that we just colored on screen. And I'm using this color to kind of match the coral colored flowers that we did on that panel. So I'm going to do kind of an ombre effect. I'm going to keep it darker near the bottom and I'm going to work my way up towards the white and let it lighten as I go. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other end of the panel, but for this one we're going to use peacock feathers. And this is going to be for the first panel that we created. So once I have the ink on there, I'm going to take this to my die cutting machine and I'm going to die cut the word prayers from each end. So you can see now we have that really pretty ombre effect and we can add these to our cards. Now because we changed the layout of the flowers, we're able to create a vertical design on that second one that we did. And we're also going to use that first one, even though I didn't love the layout of the flowers, we're going to turn it on its side and create a horizontal design. So to do the secondary sentiment on these designs, I'm going to use the Sending Prayer stamp set. And this is a really great stamp set to use with the die because it has lead-in and ending sentiment. So you can kind of put a sentiment before the word prayers or you can put one after the word prayers. So I'm going to do both versions. I'm going to do one of each on each card. So to do the secondary sentiment, I'm going to stamp these onto some black cardstock. I'm going to heat emboss them with white embossing powder, and then I'm going to cut them into thin strips, and that's going to allow me to add them to the card design either below or on top of that prayers die cut word that we've already die cut. I always use my magic powder embossing bag on black cardstock before I heat emboss just because it really helps to control that embossing powder. So you can see there I have kind of a white residue on the cardstock, but that will easily rub off once I do the embossing. So now that we have all of the pieces ready to go, we can start to assemble our cards. So for this one here, which is the first panel that we colored off screen, I'm going to add this to a Summer Splash card base, which measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I decided to cut this secondary sentiment strip in half so that I could layer it on either side of the Y in the prayers word. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adhere the prayers with some regular liquid glue. I'm just adding it straight onto the card, no foam adhesive. And then I'm going to add the secondary sentiment. I'm going to put one on the one side of the Y and the other on the other. And the reason I did this is I just didn't love how that layered over top. It covered a lot of the words, and I didn't want to position it really far down the panel. So I decided this was the best option, and I really like how it turned out. I kind of like that they all kind of join together, and it creates one full sentiment. For the second panel here, we're just adding this one to a Coral Crush card base, and this is also A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And once again, I'm just adhering this directly onto the card base, and then we're going to add our sentiment. This one is going to have the secondary sentiment lead into the word prayers, so we're going to add this first, and then we're going to add that sentiment strip directly on top. And when I put the flower stamps for this panel, I did have the prayers die in mind, so I knew that it was going to fit perfectly into this opening. So I'm just going to attach it on there, and then I'm going to add that sentiment strip right up above. I love all of the different sentiment options that this stamp set provides, since there is so many different sentiments that can be paired with the prayers word. So once I have that positioned on there, I'm just going to use my T-square ruler to make sure that it's lined up, and then I'm just going to press down and make sure everything is firmly adhered to the card front. And then the last thing I'm going to do, you're going to see here in just a minute, is I'm going to add some clear sequins to these cards. I don't want to have a lot of different contrast, but I did want to have a little bit of dimension, and I wanted to fill in some of the space around the sentiments in between the flowers. So I did add those on, and then I just added some clear stickles to the center. So that is our 2 cards that we created. Just a fun way to create a flower border using your flower stamps with some fun coloring with our Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. Thanks so much for joining me in today's video. I hope you got some ideas on ways to mix and match your flower stamps with your sentiments, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.